I knew the day would come when my stepdad showed up at my dad's warehouse with something sharp in his hands. I just didn't expect the manager to call me on base, his voice shaking, saying the words I'd been replaying in my nightmares for 2 years. "Ma'am, your stepdad's here, with cutters." Have you ever carried a secret so long it feels like a live wire in your chest? The kind of secret that isn't just about money or stuff, but about the last pieces of someone you loved, and the proof that the person sleeping next to your mother is not what he pretends to be. Have you ever watched your mom smile at a man you know is a gold digger and realize that if you say one more word against him, you'll be the villain instead of the warning? I was sitting in the corner of the barracks common room when my phone buzzed, wedged between my camo thigh and the cold metal of the chair. I almost ignored it. We're not supposed to be glued to our screens, and I just finished a 12-hour shift that left my shoulders knotted and my brain fried. But the name on the caller ID froze my thumb mid-swipe. Harbor Storage, hometown. My father's place, or what was left of it. I stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the scent of floor polish and sweat in the air. "This is Sergeant Brooks," I answered, voice automatically slipping into that firm tone the Corps drilled into me. "Miss Brooks," a man's voice stammered. Older, southern, winded. "It's Mr. Collins from Harbor Storage. You told me to call you directly if—" He broke off like he was afraid to finish the sentence. My stomach clenched. "If my mother's husband ever showed up," I said. "Yeah, I remember. What's happening?" There was a rustle, like he'd cupped his hand over the receiver for a second. When he spoke again, he sounded like a man trying to stay polite while someone yelled in his ear. "He's here right now," he whispered. "Your stepdad, Carl. He's at your unit. He brought another fellow with him, big one. They got bolt cutters and a pry dar. He says his wife gave him permission, says you're out of the country, so he's acting on her behalf." Heat shot up the back of my neck. "Did you let him in?" I asked, already knowing the answer but praying anyway. "No, ma'am. I told him we can't open anything without your say-so. He's getting real loud. He says if he doesn't help, he's going to handle it himself. He keeps waving around some paper he printed off the internet talking about family rights." My jaw clenched. "Has he cut anything yet?" "He's at the padlock. He's got those big cutters. I told him if he touches that door, I'm calling the police. But he says he'll just explain it to them." "You will call the police," I said. "Right now, put me on speaker if you have to. Let them hear me say I did not give him permission." My military brain kicked into mission mode. Heart pounding or not, the checklist was clear. Step 1, secure the perimeter. Step 2, document everything. Step 3, let the enemy make the mistake you set the trap for. Have you ever known someone was going to betray you and loved them enough that you didn't want to be right, even as you double-checked the locks? Because that's the thing. This wasn't a surprise, really. The only surprising part was that it had taken Carl this long to try something this bold. I closed my eyes for 1 second, just long enough to picture my dad's face, the way he'd looked the last time we were together in that warehouse, dust motes in the air, his big hand wrapping my hand around a brass key as he said, "Baby girl, sometimes loving your mama is going to mean telling her no. I'm sorry I'm not leaving her someone easier to love when I'm gone, but I am leaving you you, and I'm leaving you this." Back then, I thought he was being dramatic. I was 17. I didn't understand yet how grief opens doors for predators. But I understood now. Standing in that stark base hallway, combat boots planted on linoleum, phone warm against my ear, I understood exactly what he'd seen coming. I straightened my shoulders. "Mr. Collins," I said, "you're going to hang up this call and dial 911. You're going to tell them there is a man attempting to break into a storage unit that does not belong to him. Then you're going to stay inside your office, lock your door, and let your security cameras do their job." "Yes, ma'am. But if the police ask, what do I tell them about what's in there? He keeps saying there's family assets." "You tell them the truth," I said. "You don't know what's in there, and you don't need to. All that matters is whose name is on that lease." I paused, my voice dropping. "And, Mr. Collins, don't worry about what's inside. I already moved the only things that matter weeks ago. If he wants to find out what's left, that's between him and the evidence folder I left waiting for him." There was a beat of startled silence. Then, quietly, You set him up?" I corrected, "I set up a camera, and I put his past where he likes to put other people's things, in someone else's hands. This time, it will be the police's." Have you ever planned for the worst version of someone you love and hated yourself a little for it, even as you double-check the locks? I hung up with Collins and immediately pulled up my notes app. Time, date, call details. My training had taught me to log everything. Paper trails win fights long before fists or lawyers do. On another base, another black woman in uniform might have brushed this off as family drama she couldn't afford to get tangled in while deployed, but when you're the daughter of a man who broke his back to build something and then died trying to make sure it didn't get swallowed the second he was in the ground, you learn real fast that family drama can turn into financial and emotional ruin if you pretend it's not your problem. My phone buzzed again before I could even start the next call. Mom. Don't, a small, exhausted part of me whispered. Let her believe what she wants. Let her learn the hard way. Another part, that 17-year-old who watched her mother crumble on the kitchen floor when the coroner left, reached for the screen anyway. I stared at her name, thumb hovering, heart banging like a door in a storm. Have you ever had to choose in a 2-second window between being the good daughter who keeps the peace and the ungrateful one who tells the truth? I took a breath and swiped to answer, because whatever happened at that warehouse, whatever the cops found or didn't find, one thing was already clear. This wasn't just about locks and keys anymore. It was about the fact that my father trusted me with a secret my mother refused to see, and my stepfather had just walked straight into the part of the story he thought he was writing, without realizing I'd turned the page on him a long time ago. "Where are you?" my mother demanded the second I said hello, like I was supposed to be in 2 places at once, on base and back home cleaning up the wreckage of her choices. "Working," I said, glancing down the hallway to make sure nobody needed me. "Where I always am, Mom. Why?" "Carl just called me from Harbor Storage," she said, high and tight. "He said you've got the manager calling the police on him, embarrassing him in front of everybody. That place is your father's. It's our family's. What are you doing?" Have you ever had someone flip the script so fast you almost start apologizing for setting a boundary they've been trampling on for years? I clenched my jaw. "What I'm doing is protecting what Dad left us," I said evenly. "Carl is down there with bolt cutters trying to break into a unit that doesn't belong to him. That's a crime, Mom. The cops will explain it better than I can." She made a strangled noise. "I told him to go down there and check on things while you're away," she said. "We can't just leave all that sitting there. You know how people are these days, stealing everything that's not nailed down." "The only thief at that warehouse right now is your husband," I snapped before I could stop myself. Silence crackled between us. "You don't talk about him like that," she hissed. "He's your stepfather, whether you like it or not." "No," I said quietly. "He's your husband. My father died. There is no replacing him." Have you ever felt the line between grief and anger blur so hard it leaves you dizzy? I could hear her breathing hard on the other end, gearing up for another lecture about respect and moving on. Before she could start, I said, "You know what, Mom? We're not going to solve this over the phone while I'm in uniform and he's waving tools at my property. Let the police do their job. We'll talk when I'm home." I hung up before she could accuse me of being dramatic again, leaned back against the cool cinder block wall, and closed my eyes. For a few seconds, the hallway faded, and I was back in a different kind of concrete building, a cavernous, echoing place that smelled like motor oil, dust, and my father's cologne when I was a kid. Have you ever had a place that doesn't look like much to anybody else feel like the center of your universe? My dad used to say, "The warehouse is ugly in the way a bank vault is ugly," he'd say, jingling the keys on his belt. "The pretty isn't outside," he'd say. "It's what's in it and what it means." To most people, it was just a low, square building on the edge of an industrial park, faded blue paint peeling in the sun. To me, it was where my childhood happened. Saturdays on the forklift with him, the buzz of the machine under my skinny legs as he let me steer in the wide aisles. Afternoons doing homework on a folding table as he stacked boxes, his deep voice drifting over with random trivia and life lessons. "Always count your own inventory, baby girl," he'd say, sliding a calculator toward me. "Don't let nobody tell you what you have." We weren't rich. Our neighborhood knew that. We were the family with the squeaky gate, the mismatched chairs on the porch, the second-hand clothes that always smelled faintly of detergent no matter how many times you washed them. But inside that warehouse, my father walked like a king. He'd built that business from scratch, one truck, then two, then a contract with a local furniture store. He hired cousins, neighbors, men straight out of prison who just needed someone to give them a shot that wasn't a side-eye. We moved things, he'd say. Stuff, sure, but also lives. College kids to dorms, families to better houses. It matters. I believed him, still do. When I was 13, he gave me my first real responsibility. Be 17, he said, tapping a line on the grid he'd drawn on a clipboard. This one's ours, not for clients, for us. It was just another garage-style door in a row of dozens, but inside it was different. Shelving he'd built himself, labeled boxes with Mom's careful handwriting, an old leather couch nobody sat on because he said it was for one day. There was a safe in the back corner, bolted to the concrete, tucked behind a false panel. He showed me how to wedge my body in sideways to get to it, how to spin the dial slowly. He didn't open it then, he said. You'll see what's in there when you need to. For now, you just need to know how to keep other folks out. Have you ever been trusted with something so far above your age that it both thrilled and scared you? Mom didn't go out there much. The warehouse was men's work, she always said, half teasing, half serious. Her world was the house, the church, her job at the clinic. Sometimes I thought Dad liked it that way. He got to be the provider, the one with the mysterious keys and the grease on his hands. It didn't mean he loved her less, it just meant he carried things she didn't see, and maybe, deep down, he knew that if something ever happened to him, nobody else in the family would think like him about protecting what he'd built. That something came sooner than any of us expected. One minute he was hoisting a box with a laugh. The next minute he was on the floor in the same aisle, hand clutching his chest, eyes wide with shock. Heart attack, the coroner said. 49 is too young, my mother sobbed. I was 17, and everything in me felt like it had been dropped from that forklift and shattered. He'd been having chest pains for months, it turned out. Brushed them off as indigestion, getting old, whatever men like him use when they're too stubborn or scared to see a doctor. The day before he died, he sat me down at that same folding table at the back of the warehouse. Mom was working a double shift at the clinic. The warehouse was quiet, just the hum of the soda machine in the corner. I need you to listen to me, Lee, he said, his use of my nickname making my heart lurch. He laid a manila envelope on the table. What's this? I asked, fingers twitching to open it. Papers, he said. Will, deed, instructions for that safe, keys to this unit, and the ones you already got for the gate. I put your name on B17, not your mama's, yours. I blinked. Why? Because your mama has a soft heart, he said, looking me dead in the eye. That's why I married her, but it also means she's blind to certain kinds of folks who see a woman with a house and a little bit of insurance and a whole lot of loneliness and think, easy pickings. He tapped the envelope. This unit is where I keep the important things, not the couches and the TV sets, the things that keep wolves from kicking in the door. Like what? I asked. Like backup copies of every document that matters. Insurance, bank accounts, the title to the house, some cash for emergencies. He hesitated. And some information about certain men I had business with I don't exactly trust to behave if I'm not here. That safe has everything you'd need if somebody tried to play y'all. Mom should know about it too, I said, frowning. That doesn't seem fair. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Fair and safe ain't always the same thing, baby girl, he said. Your mama, bless her, would tell any man she loved where all the spare keys are on the first date. That's just who she is. I need one Brooks in this house who understands the difference between sharing and spilling. Have you ever had your father trust you with the cold version of love while your mother handled the warm? He slid the envelope toward me. He's not saying you never tell her, he said. I'm saying you tell her when it's time, when you trust the people around her not to twist what's in there. Until then, you listen to your gut. If something don't smell right, you keep that lock shut. I wanted to tell him he was being dramatic, that Mom would never let some random man into Dad's business, that I wouldn't either. But then I thought about the way she forgave everyone who crossed her, how she lent money to cousins who never paid it back, how she believed every sob story that came through the clinic doors. Dad saw the same things. He just loved her for it and protected her where he could. I took the envelope. It felt heavier than it should. Okay, I said, throat tight. I'll take care of it. He smiled, tired but proud. That's my girl. The next day, he was gone. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, casseroles, and church ladies patting my mother's hand. People tiptoed around me, like grief made me fragile. I didn't feel fragile. I felt like a windshield that had been hit once and is now holding itself together through sheer force of will. Someone had to handle the calls. Someone had to talk to the landlord, the bank, the clients. Mom was underwater in her own tears. It wasn't going to be her. The day after we buried him, I went to the warehouse alone, unlocked the gate, walked down the aisle where he'd fallen, stood there in the quiet, hands fisted at my sides. You had to pick now to die, I muttered, tears finally spilling. Couldn't wait until after I graduated? Grief makes you cruel sometimes. He wasn't there to be offended. I wiped my face, went to B17, turned the key he'd given me like 100 times before. Inside, everything was exactly how he'd left it. The safe in the corner loomed like a question mark. I didn't open it that day. The knowledge that I could was enough. I closed the door, slid the new padlock through, and tucked the envelope deeper into my backpack. I went home, helped my mother sort bills, made phone calls pretending my voice didn't shake. When she asked, What are we going to do about your father's business? I told her the half-truth we both could bear. We'll sell what we can. We'll close the rest. I didn't mention B17. Not yet. Have you ever held back the truth from someone you love because you knew they weren't ready to handle what it meant? Fast forward a few years. I enlisted right out of high school. College felt like a luxury we couldn't afford yet, and I was tired of watching Mom crumble at every unexpected bill. The military offered structure, purpose, and a paycheck that arrived on time. Dad had been Army Reserves. I'd grown up on his stories about service, about brotherhood, about how putting on a uniform changed the way you carried yourself. He'd wanted to go full-time back then, but life, me, Mom, the business, had anchored him. Going in felt like honoring a path he couldn't walk. I remember telling Mom my decision at that same worn kitchen table. Her eyes went wide. "The military?" she repeated. "Lee, that's dangerous. Black girls like you, they don't respect y'all the same. You think they gonna look out for you?" "I can look out for myself," I said. "You taught me that. So did Dad." "He taught you to look out for other people too," she argued. "What about me? You gonna leave me here alone?" Guilt stabbed at me, but so did resentment. "I'm not leaving you," I said. "I'll send money, I'll call, but I can't stay here and slowly drown with you. Dad wouldn't want that." She cried, of course. She always cried when change came. But in the end, she hugged me tight at the bus station, whispering, "You come back to me in one piece, you hear? Don't let them break you." Basic tried, so did deployment, so did the subtle ways the world shrinks you when you're a black woman in uniform. Assumptions, questions, looks. But every time I felt myself getting small, I remembered my father standing tall in that ugly warehouse with keys jangling at his hip. "Count your own inventory," he'd say. So I did. My worth, my skills, my boundaries. Not perfect, but solid. I didn't think much about B17 those first couple years, beyond paying the bill automatically each month and visiting on leave. I'd go out there, unlock the door, sit on that old leather couch he'd put in there for one day, and just be? Talk to him like he could hear me, run my fingers over the safe dial without spinning it. Not yet, I'd murmur. We're not in emergency mode. Not on my watch. Then came Carl. He sauntered into our lives 2 years after Dad died, all cologne and compliments. He met Mom at church, of all places. I was home on leave with her in the pew when he slid in beside us like he'd known us forever. "You must be Mrs. Brooks," he said, leaning in just a little too close. "I've seen you here before. You sing like an angel." I watched my mother blush, something I hadn't seen since I was a child. Her grieving widow black was long gone, replaced with bright colors again, hair done, lipstick on. Part of me was glad. The other part watched him the way you watch a stray dog near your garbage cans, with suspicion and a readiness to chase it off if it got too close. Turns out, I was right to watch. The first thing he asked me when Mom introduced us in the church parking lot wasn't, "What do you do?" or "How long are you home for?" It was, "So, your daddy had a business, right? Must have left y'all something nice." Have you ever met someone and instantly felt the weight of their interest settle in all the wrong places? Over the next year, he wormed his way in, little favors, fixing things around the house I hadn't gotten to yet, bringing Mom flowers just because, quoting Bible verses about second chances. She soaked it up like dry ground in a drought. Every time I raised an eyebrow, she said, "You're being overprotective. He's a good man. You just don't want to see me happy because you're still stuck in the past." She wasn't entirely wrong. I was stuck in my own way. But I also knew the difference between flawed and fake. I watched how he treated waitstaff, how he talked about his ex-wife, always crazy, how his tone changed when he thought I wasn't listening. I watched the way his eyes flicked to the mail stack when he thought no one noticed, how he asked too many casual questions about what all your daddy left behind. And every time he said some slick little thing about the good old days or not letting resources sit idle, my mind flashed back to Dad's grave face in B-17. Sometimes loving your mama is going to mean telling her no. I didn't tell her about the public records I found on a slow night in the barracks. Bankruptcy filings, a fraud charge that got pled down to, a couple of civil suits from women whose names and stories sounded too similar to be coincidence. I tried showing her once, sitting at the same kitchen table where she'd wept over Dad's absence. She scanned the papers, lips pressed tight, then shoved them back at me. "People can make anything look bad on paper," she said. "You don't know the whole story." "Then ask him," I urged. "If he lies about this, what else is he lying about?" She stood up, chair scraping. "This is my life, not your little investigation. You don't get to decide who I love." Have you ever had your warning tossed aside as jealousy because the person you're trying to protect would rather cling to a fantasy than face another loss? When they got married, small ceremony at church, potluck reception in the fellowship hall, I stood in the back in my dress blues, arms folded tight behind me. I didn't toast. I didn't sabotage it either. Love isn't a switch you can flip off just because the person you love is making a mistake. I hugged Mom, told her I hoped she got the happiness she deserved. I shook Carl's hand, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "My father worked too hard for what he left behind for anyone to play with it." He smiled that oily smile. "Of course, we're family now. I'd never do anything to hurt this family." Family. He said it like a password that would open every door. But not B-17, not as long as I had breath in my body. When I went back to base after the wedding, I stopped by Harbor Storage on my way out of town. Mr. Collins, the manager, had been there since Dad first signed the lease. Gray hair, stooped shoulders, eyes that had seen too many people lose too much. "Your daddy was a good man," he said when I told him he'd passed. "Always paid on time, said this unit was for his girls." "Now it's for me and my mom," I said. "On paper, it's just me. That's the way he set it up." "I remember," he said. "Came in here with a stack of documents one day, made a big fuss about distinguishing this one from the business accounts. Said, 'If I'm gone, you listen to my daughter, not to nobody else, you hear?'" He patted my hand. I've been listening. That's when I gave him the instructions that led to the phone call in the hallway, the cutters, the cops. I wrote it all out, notarized it, kept a copy with my own papers. I also made changes in B-17 itself, moved the truly irreplaceable things, the original will, Mom's ring from Dad, a small stash of emergency cash, a video Dad had recorded on an old camcorder the week before he died. I moved that into a smaller unit under a different number only I knew. I double-locked that one, checked the door myself twice before I left. In B-17, the unit Carl knew about, I left just enough to tempt him. A decoy safe, a folder with his own sins printed out in black and white, a letter that began, "If you're reading this, it means you finally showed your true colors." Then I went back to base and waited. Not in a cartoon villain way, not gleefully. In that tired, resigned way you wait for a storm you can see on the radar but can't make the sky ignore. I didn't tell my mom what was in there. Not yet. Not because I wanted to keep secrets from her, but because I knew if she had to choose between my evidence and his excuses without something undeniable in front of her, she'd pick him. Loneliness is a powerful drug. So is the fantasy that you didn't make a mistake marrying someone who doesn't deserve you. I told Collins to call me if Carl ever showed up. I told myself, maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't, that he'd surprise me and choose my mom over his greed. I wanted to be wrong about him so badly it made my teeth ache. Have you ever hoped someone would prove you right up until the exact moment they prove you wrong? So when that Harbor Storage caller ID flashed on my phone and Mr. Collins whispered, "Your stepdad's here, with cutters," I knew two things at once. One, that the man my mother had married had finally become exactly who my father had warned me about. And two, that the only thing between that man and the disaster he was trying to bring down on our heads was me. Back in that base hallway, I slipped my phone into my other hand and checked the time. Late afternoon. If Carl was there now, running his mouth and rattling those cutters, I had a tiny window to turn this from family dispute to documented crime. Have you ever had to switch from daughter mode to soldier mode in the middle of a phone call with your own mother? That's what it felt like. I pulled up the non-emergency number for the precinct I'd bookmarked months ago. Muscle memory. I'd already had one conversation with Detective Harris when I first dug into Carl's past. If he ever crosses a legal line with your dad's assets, Harris had then, call me. We can't do much about someone being a jerk. We can do plenty about someone committing fraud or burglary. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, a rough voice answered, "Harris." "Detective, this is Sergeant Aaliyah Brooks." I introduced myself like I was back in the interview room. "We spoke 6 months ago about my stepfather, Carl Benson, and concerns about him targeting my mother and attempting to access my late father's storage unit." There was a pause. Papers rustled. "Sergeant Brooks," he said slowly. "Yeah, I remember. You sent over those bankruptcy records and that civil suit from his ex-wife. He's at my storage facility right now. Harbor Storage on Highway 23. The manager just called me. Carl is on my unit with bolt cutters, claiming he has the right to open it. The lease is solely in my name. I have written instructions on file with the facility stating no one but me is allowed access. Manager's about to dial 911. "Is he inside the unit?" Harris asked. "Not yet, but he's at the lock. I left a camera running inside facing the door. If he cuts it, you'll have him on video committing forced entry." Harris whistled low. "You weren't kidding when you said you'd been preparing." "I'm in another state on active duty," I added, "because black women learn early to over-explain so nobody can say we left out details." "Understood," he said. "Text me Collins's number. I'll call the responding officers and let them know this isn't just some guy arguing with his stepdaughter over a couch." I sent the contact before we hung up. Then, because years of being double-checked had taught me to double cover myself, I fired off a quick email to the storage company with my scan of the lease and a summary of events.
Unauthorized individual attempting to access Unit B-17. I do not consent. If there's one thing the Marines taught me, it's that if it's not written down, it might as well not exist. I should have gone back to my duties then. I was technically on break, but the clock kept ticking, and black women in uniform don't get as many grace passes as some of our peers. But my feet wouldn't move. My brain had already crossed state lines. I texted Mr. Collins quickly. Detective Harris is aware. Call 911 now. Do not confront them. Stay in office. Cameras will catch the rest. His reply came back almost instantly. Already did. They on their way. He's cutting lock. I locked myself in. I pictured his shaky hands, the tremor in his voice. Harbor Storage wasn't some mega chain. It was a mom-and-pop place with one aging manager and a part-time kid on weekends. Collins had always been kind to me and my father. I hated that Carl was making him collateral damage in his greed. I broke protocol then, stepped into the empty laundry room and hit FaceTime, something I rarely did on duty. The signal flickered, then stabilized. A blurry view of Collins's office popped up. The desk, the coffee machine, the bank of little TV screens showing feeds from around the property. "You okay?" I asked. His lined face filled the frame. "Shaky," he admitted, "but doors locked. Got my eyes on him." He turned the phone so I could see the main camera. Grainy, but clear enough. There was Carl, just like I'd imagined. Baseball cap low, dark glasses, cheap gold chain glinting. Beside him stood the bigger guy with shaved head and sleeves of tattoos, holding the bolt cutters like a promise. "He's brought backup?" I muttered. "Says that's his cousin," Collins whispered. "Looks like trouble to me." We watched as Carl gestured wildly, pointing at my unit's roll-up door, then at the office. His mouth moved fast. Even without sound, I could read the arrogance. He unfurled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, waved it like a badge. The cousin laughed, shook his head, then set the bolt cutters across the lock. "He's really doing it," I breathed. I felt something in my chest shift from dread to a cold, hard clarity. Have you ever watched somebody walk into a trap of their own making and thought, "I gave you every chance not to do this"? My father's voice floated up from memory. Sometimes you gotta let a man be who he is if you want everybody else to see it too. The lock snapped under the cutters with a final metallic crack that I could almost hear through the screen. My throat tightened. It wasn't just a piece of hardware, it was the last physical barrier between my father's trust and Carl's intentions. They rolled up the door, revealing the shadowy inside of B-17, the couch, the dusty shelves, the decoy safe in the back corner, exactly where I'd left it. I saw Carl's posture change when his eyes landed on it. He stepped inside, like a raccoon who'd just found an open trash can. Cousin hung back at the threshold, keeping watch. Perfect. Let there be witnesses. Collins whispered, "Police just pulled in." Sure enough, one of the tiny screens flashed red and blue reflections as a squad car turned into the lot. The cousin spotted the car first. He hissed something and backed out of the unit, hands raised halfway like he was deciding whether to run or play innocent. Carl emerged a second later, clutching the folder I'd left perched on top of the safe, fists white around the edges. Even from a distance, I could see my own handwriting on the tab. Carl Benson, read me. Carl looked down at it, then up at the approaching officers. It was almost cinematic, the way his face contorted from triumph to confusion to anger in 3 seconds flat. One cop gestured toward the cutters on the ground. The other pointed at the lock. They were asking questions. Carl started talking fast, waving the folder, shaking his head. I could imagine the script he was trying to sell. Family business, misunderstanding, overreacting. But the images on those screens told a different story. Have you ever been grateful for inanimate objects, cameras, locks, folders, because they say the things people refuse to hear from your mouth? I had to hang up then. Duty called. My break was over. I slid my phone back into my pocket, schooled my face, and went to formation with everybody else. On the outside, I was just Sergeant Brooks again, boots aligned, chin up, reciting responses in unison. On the inside, my mind was still in that warehouse, standing between my father's shelves and my stepfather's greed. I checked my phone that night, back in my bunk, when the barracks had quieted to the usual soft chorus of snores and whispered jokes. There were 3 new messages from Detective Harris, time-stamped over the past few hours. 1. We detained Carl B. on scene. Attempted forced entry documented. Manager's statement taken. 2. Your folder was thorough. You have a future as an investigator if you ever leave the Corps. 3. We're processing charges. At minimum, criminal mischief and attempted burglary. Given his prior, DA is interested. I exhaled slowly, some of the tightness in my chest easing. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the narrative had shifted. No more, he's just trying to help your mom handle things. No more, you're overreacting. This was on record now, in reports, in camera footage, in an arrest log you can't pray away at Bible study. There was one more message waiting, though, and it made my stomach not back up again. Mom, how could you do this to us? No hi, no are you safe, just that. I stared at the all-caps accusation until the words blurred. Us. She still saw Carl and herself as a unit, me as the outsider. I pocketed the phone, turned over on the thin mattress, and stared at the underside of the bunk above me. In the dim light, the metal slats looked like prison bars. Have you ever done the right thing for someone you love and still lay awake wondering if you'd just blown up whatever was left of your relationship with them? Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it dragged dreams of the warehouse with it. Only this time, when Carl broke the lock, it wasn't copies and decoys inside, but every good memory I had of my father, spilling out onto the concrete for anyone to step on. I woke up before dawn, sweat slick on my neck, heart racing. The barracks were still, the pre-PT quiet that always feels like the air is holding its breath. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and let them dangle for a second, grounding myself. Concrete under my feet, not warehouse floor. Now came the part I dreaded almost more than the legal fallout, talking to my mother when she'd had a full night to build her case against me in her head. I texted her, "I'll call you after PT." Her response was instant even at that hour. "Don't bother if you're just going to insult my husband again." I closed my eyes, inhaled, exhaled. Then I typed back, "Then maybe this time actually listen to what your husband did instead of how I reacted to it." No dots appeared. She left me on red. I went through the motions that morning. Push-ups, sprints, cadence called under the rising sun, my body on autopilot.
My mind was a slideshow. Dad's hand guiding mine on the forklift wheel, Mom's hand slipping into Carl's at the altar, Colin's hand trembling as he held his phone toward the camera screens. Me, 17, promising I'd protect them. Me, 27, wondering what protection is worth if the person you're protecting won't believe they're in danger. The call came in the afternoon, just as I was cleaning my weapon. The ringtone I'd left on for family cut through the clink-clink of metal and brushes. I glanced at the screen. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But then I pictured her alone in that house, curtains drawn against the nosy neighbors whispering about police cars at the storage facility. And I answered. "Hey," I said quietly. "Don't hey me," she snapped. Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying for hours. "You had your stepfather arrested." "He had himself arrested," I replied, setting the cleaning rod down. "I told him months ago not to go near that unit. I told you. He chose to cut that lock anyway." "He was following my instructions," she said. "I told him to make sure nothing valuable was just sitting there. People talk in this town, Aaliyah. They know your father had that place. They know you're gone most of the year. We can't just leave things unprotected." "It was protected," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "by a lock in my name and a manager who knows how to read a lease. Carl decided your fear was a good excuse to break the law." "You set him up," she accused. "You left things there for him to find, didn't you? Your dossier or whatever it's called. The detective came by, showed me papers, cases I never heard of. You dug up his past and you used it to make him look bad." Have you ever had someone twist your hard-won truth into an act of malice?
I rubbed my temple. "Mom," I said, "I didn't make him marry those other women. I didn't make him get sued. I didn't make him file bankruptcy 3 times. I just printed what's already public record. You could have looked it up yourself." "People make mistakes," she said. "You think your father was perfect?" "No," I said, sharper than I meant. "I know he wasn't. He worked himself to death because he was too proud to ask for help. He kept secrets because he thought it was protecting you. I'm not blind to his flaws. But he never cut a lock off someone else's door and tried to claim what wasn't his." Silence. Then, softly, "He left that place for us." "He left that place to me," I corrected, "to look out for us, to look out for you. That's what I've been doing even when you've made it hell to do it." The line crackled. For a second, I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, quieter, "They charged him." "I know," I said. "Detective Harris told me. He says it was a misunderstanding. He says he thought you'd given him permission before you left, that you told him where the unit was, that you're just upset." "Did he show you the lock? The broken metal? The police report that says forced entry? The video from the camera in the unit? Or did he just show him his sorry face and wait for you to fill in the excuses?" Have you ever realized the person you're arguing with hasn't seen the same evidence you have, but they'd rather trust someone's story than ask for receipts? "The detective showed me some of it," she admitted. "It didn't look good." Her voice cracked on that last word. It didn't look good. Understatement of the year. I could have pressed then, could have hit her with every "I told you so" I'd swallowed over the past 2 years, could have listed every time she'd chosen Carl's comfort over my caution. But something in her tone stopped me. It wasn't righteous indignation this time. It was tired, shaky, like the scaffolding she'd built her new life on was starting to creak under its own weight. "Mom," I said, softer, "do you really believe that a man who loves you would go behind your back to break into your dead husband's warehouse without your stepdaughter's consent? Does that sound like protection or entitlement?" Silence. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I believe right now. I just know I'm tired of feeling stupid. First, your father lies about how bad his chest pain is and leaves me a widow at 48. Then you keep secrets about what he left. Now my new husband's past is on my coffee table in a police folder, and the whole town is going to be talking." Tears burned my eyes. "Dad didn't lie to hurt you," I said. "He lied because he was scared. So are you. So is Carl. The difference is Dad's lies hurt him. Carl's lies are aimed at your bank account. And my secrets? Those were me trying to honor Dad's plan until you were ready to look at it without him here to soften the blow." "You didn't ask me to do that," she said weakly. "No," I said. "Dad did. In that warehouse, in B17, with a key in my hand and a stack of papers you still haven't seen." There it was, the part she didn't know, the part I'd held back because I'd been waiting, hoping for a version of this conversation that didn't start with her defending a man in handcuffs. "What papers?" she asked, suspicion creeping back. "What else did he keep from me?" "Things you should have known, but not when you were drowning. Things about the business, the house, the money, and things about men like Carl. He didn't think you could handle it when you were grieving. I've been deciding when to show you ever since And you thought after you had my husband arrested was a good time?" she snapped, the fight flaring again. "I thought after he proved exactly what kind of man he is was the only time you might actually listen." Have you ever realized that sometimes the only way to open someone's eyes is to let them walk into a wall with you holding the flashlight? We went in circles after that. Her clinging to the shredded remains of the life she thought she'd built with Carl, me trying to thread the needle between empathy and enabling. In the end, I said,
I'll be home on leave in 3 weeks. We're going to the warehouse together. You're going to see what Dad left. All of it. No more middlemen. I don't know if I want to. That's okay, I said, surprising both of us. You just have to show up. When we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bunk for a long time, helmet on the floor between my boots, hands clasped loosely. Around me, life on base buzzed on. Orders shouted, engines revving, laughter in the distance. Out there, I was Sergeant Brooks, squared away Marine. In here, in my head, I was still Lee, the girl holding a manila envelope at a folding table being told to protect a woman who never asked to be protected from the people she invited in. Have you ever realized that the warehouse you're really guarding isn't made of metal and concrete, but of someone else's hope and your own boundaries? 3 weeks. That's what I kept telling myself. 3 weeks until leave. 3 weeks until I could stand in front of B-17 with my mother and finally turn the key not just on a unit, but on a truth I'd been carrying alone for a decade. Carl thought he'd find money in there, thought he'd slice one lock and everything my father built would spill out at his feet. Now, thanks to his impatience and my preparation, what he'd actually find was a court date and a folder with his own sins staring him back. And my mother? She was going to find out that the real inheritance my father left wasn't cash. It was me.
3 weeks sounds like a small number until you're counting it in push-ups, chow lines, and sleepless nights. I marked the days off on the little calendar in my wall locker like I was back in high school, scratching X's until summer. Except this time, summer wasn't a break. It was walking straight into a storm I'd helped summon. Have you ever been both dreading and craving a confrontation at the same time? My leave finally started on a gray Friday. The sky matched my mood as I dragged my duffel through the airport. The low murmur of travelers blended with the echo of my mother's last words on the phone. I don't know what I believe right now. By the time my plane touched down back home, my stomach was one knotted muscle. I hadn't set foot in my mother's house since the wedding. Walking up those cracked concrete steps with my uniform blouse tucked into my jeans instead of blues or camis felt stranger than I expected. The same squeaky gate, the same potted plant she'd had for years on the porch, now thriving under her and Carl's care. I knocked, even though I technically still had a key. The door opened a crack, then wider. Mom looked older. She'd always carried herself younger than her age, makeup on, hair pressed, a little sparkle in her earrings, no matter how tired she was. Now her edges of gray weren't smoothed back. Lines I hadn't noticed before had carved deeper around her mouth. Her eyes, normally warm, even when she was mad, were ringed with red. "You look skinny," she said by way of greeting. "Good to see you too," I replied, trying for lightness. She stepped aside. "Come in." The living room was the same and different. Same couch, same TV, same framed photos of our family on the walls, but now there were little intrusions of Carl everywhere. A leather recliner that clashed with everything, a framed print of some generic Bible verse about new beginnings that I'd never seen in our house before. His shoes by the door, even though he wasn't there. "Where is he?" I asked, toeing off my boots. "At his sister's," she said shortly. "The lawyer told him to stay away for now." There was an undercurrent there. Hurt, anger, maybe a bit of embarrassment. The whole town knew about the arrest. This wasn't the kind of place where police cars at the storage lot went unnoticed. "You ready?" I asked. She looked at me sharply. "You're really going to make me do this?" "I'm not making you do anything. I'm honoring what Dad asked me to do. It's your choice whether you want to see what he left." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she grabbed her purse and keys. "Fine," she said. "Let's go." The drive to Harbor Storage was quiet. The radio stayed off. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle she tried to pretend I didn't hear. Have you ever sat inches away from someone you love and felt miles between you because of all the words neither of you were ready to say? When we turned into the lot, my throat tightened. It was like stepping through a portal. The faded blue building, the tangle of weeds at the edges, the sun-bleached banner that still read "First month free" in peeling letters. Harbor Storage looked exactly like it had when I was a kid, clutching a Happy Meal toy in one hand and my dad's palm in the other. What had changed was the yellow police tape fluttering from one of the units. Mom's eyes locked on it immediately. Is that? That's B-17. Panic flashed across her face. "You said nothing important was in there," she whispered. "You told me you moved the real—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. Treasure, documents, evidence of how badly she'd misjudged her husband? "I did," I said. "Nothing in there now can't be replaced or printed. That's the only reason I could afford to let Carl do what he did. Come on." We parked and walked toward the office. Mr. Collins met us at the door, holding it open with a shaky hand. "Mrs. Brooks," he greeted me, relief and guilt tangled in his expression. "And this must be your mama." "Hi, Mr. Collins," I said. "This is my mother, Gloria." They exchanged stiff nods. Mom's eyes were darting everywhere but his, toward the cameras, the tape, the familiar outline of my father's old realm. "Detective Harris left some paperwork for you," Collins said, sliding an envelope across the counter. "And, he said it was all right if you took a look in the unit. They finished with it yesterday." Mom flinched at the word unit like it was a diagnosis. "I don't need to see where my husband was criminalized," she muttered. "Yes, you do," I said firmly. "It's the only way this is going to feel real instead of like a story you can rewrite in your head." Have you ever had to drag someone you love toward the truth, knowing it's going to cut both of you? We stopped first at B-17. The yellow tape hung limp now, one end loose where the wind had torn it. A brand new lock, shiny and untouched, sat where the old one had been snapped. The metal around it was scarred, jagged, a visible wound. "They already replaced the lock," Mom observed, almost with relief, like that meant nothing bad had happened. "The damage is done," I said. "On the door, on the record." I pulled out my keyring and slid the new key into the lock, turned it. The door rattled up, revealing the familiar rows of shelves, the lonely couch, and the rectangle of space where the decoy safe had once stood. "Where's the—" Mom began. "Police impound. Evidence. They have it, along with the cameras." I stepped inside. She followed reluctantly. Dust motes floated in a shaft of light from the small, grimy window near the ceiling. The air smelled like old cardboard and motor oil. Mom's gaze swept over everything, like she was expecting stacks of $100 bills to tumble out of a box any second. "This is it?" she said skeptically. "After all this fuss? Some old furniture and boxes?" This was for memories and decoys. The safe that was here, it had copies of everything in the folder the detective showed you, about Carl, about his past. I watched her face carefully. "Did you read it all?" I asked. She folded her arms. "I skimmed," she admitted. "It was a lot." "The lawsuits?" I prompted. "The exes he met after their husbands died? Women with insurance payouts, pensions, paid-off houses. Sound familiar?" She looked away, blinking rapidly. "People change," she murmured weakly. "Then why is he still doing the same things?" I asked quietly. I gestured at the gorge doorframe. "Different city, same playbook." Have you ever watched someone try to protect their pride over their safety? It would have been easy to stay in that unit and keep arguing in circles, but B-17 wasn't the destination. It was just the crime scene. We stepped back out, and I pulled the door down until it rolled shut with a heavy thunk. Then I turned to Mom. "Come on," I said. "This isn't the one you need to see." Confusion flickered across her face. What do you mean? Dad left me more than one space here, I said. He put B-17 with the business paperwork, but when things started going south with his partner, he moved the important stuff. Her eyes narrowed. What partner? That's a whole other story, I said. The short version is, Dad was good with trucks and terrible with trust. That's why he made me the backup plan. We walked down 2 more rows, past units I'd lugged couches and boxes into as a kid. Stopped in front of a smaller, nondescript door. C03. No tape on this one, no scratches, just a plain brass lock that had only ever been opened by me. I slipped a different key into this one. The teeth caught, turned. I felt a strange little snap in my chest that had nothing to do with metal. This wasn't just a padlock. This was 10 years of secrets clinking open with a soft click. "What's in there?" Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll see," I said, and hauled the door up. The air was cooler, less musty. I'd been in and out of this one more often, keeping things fresh, rotating, adding. There were still boxes here, photo albums, labeled containers with Christmas and kitchen written on them. But the back was different. A sturdy workbench Dad had salvaged from a closing factory, shelves with fireproof lockboxes, and against the far wall, another safe. That safe was bigger than the decoy had been. No false panel, no attempt to hide it, just solid metal with a dial and handle, bolted direct into the concrete. A little sticky note in my father's handwriting was still taped to the front. "For my girls, when I'm not here to argue about it." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "I couldn't open it until after he died," I said softly. "He told me how to, but I wouldn't. Felt like rushing the loss." I remembered that day vividly, a year after the funeral, when the waves of grief had turned from constant crashing to occasional surges. I'd come here alone, sat on the cold floor, back against the safe, envelope in my lap. Finally worked up the courage to spin the dial, line up the numbers he'd muttered at that folding table like a secret code, the satisfying clunk when it released. Inside, not piles of cash, not some dramatic reveal, but order, folders, envelopes, a busted-up camcorder with a sticky note, "Press play." Treasure in the TV sense, treasure in the I thought ahead sense. Have you ever opened something expecting drama and found quiet, thoughtful love instead? Mom's hand trembled now, somewhere between accusation and awe. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice broke. "Because you were drowning. And then when you came up for air, you grabbed onto Carl like he was the only life jacket. If I'd shown you this then, you would have seen him, not Dad. You'd have asked how fast you could sign it over to your new husband." She flinched. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "None of this is fair. Dad dying so young wasn't fair. You being lonely wasn't fair. Me having to be the one to hold all this wasn't fair. But it's what happened." I walked over to the safe, heart pounding like it had that first time. My fingers automatically traced the familiar arc of the dial. I hadn't needed to open it in months, but the combo lived in my muscles now. 27, 3, 41. Back and forth. Click. The handle gave under my hand with the same grudging squeal of metal on metal. I pulled the door open, the hinges protesting softly, and stepped aside. "Go ahead," I said. "See what he left you. All of you, not just what Carl wanted to believe was in here." Mom stood frozen for a moment, purse clutched to her chest like a shield. Then she took a step forward, and another. She reached out, touched the edge of the safe door like she expected it to be hot. She peered in. First shelf, a neat stack of folders labeled in my father's blocky handwriting. House, insurance, business, bank. Second shelf, 2 smaller fireproof boxes. Beside them, the old camcorder with his note. Third shelf, a medium-sized envelope with Gloria scrawled across it, and another with Aaliyah. No gold bars, no duffel bags stuffed with cash, just life. Have you ever watched someone realize the riches they've been imagining look nothing like the riches that actually matter? Mom's hand shook as she reached for the envelope with her name. She glanced back at me, eyes wide. "Can I—" "It's yours," I said. "I've never opened that one." It was true. I'd looked at mine, at the folders, at the financials, but that envelope with Gloria on it, that was between her and the man she buried. My respect for that line was one of the few things that had kept me from throwing it in her face during darker arguments. She slid a finger under the flap, tore it clumsily, pulled out a few sheets of paper folded in thirds. Her eyes scanned the first page. Then they filled. She started to sway. I was at her side and 2 steps. "Sit," I murmured, guiding her toward the old wooden stool Dad had once used to reach the top shelves. She sank onto it, papers clenched in white-knuckled fists. "What does it say?" I asked gently. "What's he telling you?" Her voice came out in breathy fragments. He wrote this when he first got diagnosed. Said he didn't know if he'd have time to say all this in person." She swallowed hard. "He says he loves me, that he knows I'm going to blame myself when he dies, that I'm going to want to fill the empty with something, someone." She laughed once bitter. "He even wrote, 'Don't you go grabbing the first fool who tells you you're pretty at church, Glor.'" That was so exactly like him. I almost smiled through my own sudden tears. "He says if I do fall in love again, he hopes it's with somebody who loves me more than what we built. He says that's why he put this in your name and mine, so no man could sweet-talk his way into owning the roof over my head." She flipped to the second page. "He wrote out timelines," she whispered. "When the mortgage would be paid off, what the life insurance would cover. He says between the house being clear and the policies, you won't need a man's money. Don't let one ever make you think you do." Her voice broke on that last line. Have you ever watched words written years ago reach straight through time to slap the present awake? I felt my own anger at Dad, at his secrecy, at his pride, melt into something more complicated. He hadn't been trying to sideline my mother. He'd been trying to build her a world where she didn't have to trade companionship for survival. She just hadn't believed him, or hadn't known how to live in that world without old scripts running the show. Mom wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, leaving little streaks of black mascara. "He says if I'm reading this and already remarried, to remember that the house is mine, not ours, that any man who truly loves me will be okay with that." She let the pages fall to her lap, shoulders shaking. "I didn't even ask Carl how he felt about me owning this place," she admitted. "I just assumed everything would be ours, 'cause that's what you do when you get married. I thought that's what moving on looks like." "Moving on doesn't have to mean giving up what you earned," I said quietly. "Dad knew that. He wanted you to know it too. He just didn't get the chance to walk you through it level-headed." "And you knew all this?" she said, looking up at me through wet lashes. "All these years? You carried it?" "Not all of it. I never read that letter. I just knew what was in the folders, what the numbers meant. I tried to tell you in pieces, but every time you looked at me, you saw the girl who lost her father, not the woman he trusted with the plan." She stared at me for a long heartbeat, then hoarsely, "That's on me." Have you ever waited so long to hear someone you love take responsibility that when they finally do, you don't know what to do with the relief? I turned back to the safe, pulled out the folder labeled House, and handed it to her. Deed. Paid off when Dad said it would be. He put it in your name and mine as joint tenants. That means Carl never had a legal claim, no matter what he tried to tell you. She opened it, scanning the documents like the old clinic admin she used to be. Old training kicked in. I saw her shoulders square a little as the bureaucratic language became familiar. So when Carl said he needed to be on it to protect us, he was either lying or ignorant. Both are not a good look for a man who wants to be in charge of somebody else's roof. We went through the others in a haze. Insurance policies, modest but enough. Bank statements with sensible balances. A small investment account flagged for Aaliyah's education/emergency. Each piece told the same story. My father hadn't been some financial wizard, but he'd been diligent, thoughtful, determined that we wouldn't have to start from zero if he left early. Mom looked from the papers to the door where the yellow tape on B-17 fluttered faintly in the breeze. He was trying to tell me I didn't have to be scared of being alone, she whispered. And I went and chose the one man whose whole livelihood depends on women being scared of that. Her voice cracked again.
I'm so damn tired of trusting the wrong people. Then start trusting the right ones, I said softly. Trust Dad's foresight. Trust your own eyes now that you've seen the evidence. And maybe start trusting me when I say I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to keep you from getting stripped of everything he bled for. She looked at me a long moment. Then something in her face shifted. Not a full transformation, just a small, crucial tilt. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for how I talked to you on the phone, for calling you dramatic when you were the only one actually thinking clearly. We can get to the forgiveness part later. Step 1 is what you do next. She took a shuddering breath. I already told Detective Harris I'd cooperate. He says the DA wants my statement, wants to show a pattern. I'll tell them everything, even the stuff that makes me look stupid. You're not stupid. You were grieving, lonely. People like Carl smell that. Still, she murmured, I'm filing for divorce, or annulment if they'll give it to me. Pastor's not going to like it, but he can take it up with this letter. She held up Dad's pages as armor. Good, I said. Relief washed through me so fast it made me lightheaded. And after that? She looked around the unit, the boxes of memories, the safe, the stool she was perched on. After that, she said slowly, I start learning how to be by myself without grabbing the first hand that reaches, with some help. She glanced at me. Maybe from a therapist who isn't my daughter? I smiled, a real one this time. Therapists are great. They get paid to listen to the stuff you won't tell your kids. She let out a watery laugh. And what about you? She asked. You still gonna keep this place your little secret base, or are you gonna let me come here sometimes when you're gone? I thought about it. About Dad asking me to be the gatekeeper. About my own resentment at having to be that person. About the tiny, selfish comfort I got from knowing there was one space in the world that was mine and his, untouched by anyone else's drama. Have you ever realized that guarding something alone eventually turns into another kind of cage? I nodded slowly. We'll share it. On conditions. We keep it in both our names. No men get keys. Ever. And if you start dating again someday, we don't mention a word about units or safes until he's proven he cares more about you than about your square footage. She rolled her eyes. Might be easier to just stay single. That's one option, I said dryly. We sat there for a while in the dim light of C03. 2 black women in a concrete box full of a dead man's plans and a living family's future. For the first time in a long time, the silence between us felt less like a gulf and more like a pause between verses of the same song. You know, Mom said eventually, daubing her nose, your father would have loved that you went military. He always did like the idea of you being able to take care of yourself. I know. He also would have lectured me for letting my hair get this dry. Now that he would have done. We both knew things weren't magically fixed. There was a court case ahead,
gossip to endure, new boundaries to learn. But something fundamental had shifted. The lock was open, not just on the safe, on the part of my mother's mind that had been clamped shut around the narrative, I need a man to be whole. On the drive back, she reached over at a red light and squeezed my knee. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being the one who listened to him when I couldn't." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I was mad at him for leaving it on me, still am a little, but I'm starting to see why he did. If he'd told me all that stuff straight, I would have fought him on it, called him controlling. Maybe we both needed your stubborn behind as the middleman. "Middle woman," I corrected. She smiled. "Middle woman," she agreed. Have you ever felt a role you resented, protector, gatekeeper, the strong one, start to feel less like a burden and more like a legacy you're willing to carry as long as you're not carrying it alone? Back on base a week later, I added one more thing to my dog tags chain. The key to C03 hung there now, cool against my skin whenever I tucked it under my shirt. Not a weight, a reminder. That key wasn't just to a warehouse. It was to a story my father started, and I was finally allowing my mother to read. Have you ever been the person who sees it first in your family, and then even when you're vindicated, it doesn't feel like a victory? Carl's case moved faster than all of us expected. Maybe it was the video, him clearly cutting the lock, clearly walking into a unit with my name on the lease. Maybe it was the folder, all those past suits and charges laid out like a greatest hits album of bad decisions. Maybe the DA just got finally tired of watching men like him hop from widow to widow in our zip code. A few weeks after I went back to base, Detective Harris texted me. He took a plea, admitted to attempted burglary, gets probation plus restitution plus mandatory financial counseling. Judge read him the riot act on record about targeting widows. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at that screen for a long time. Probation didn't feel like much for everything Carl had tried to pull. But then I pictured his face in that courtroom, all the charm stripped away under fluorescent lights and microphones, and I realized the real sentence wasn't just legal, it was social. In a town like ours, once your scheme is on paper, you don't slink into another woman's life quite so easily. My mom called later that night. "It's over," she said simply. The judge granted the annulment, said given the timeline, the fraud, and the lack of shared assets, we could treat it like it never happened. Her voice cracked on that last part. "But it did happen," she whispered. "I let it." Have you ever listened to someone finally see their own part in their hurt and felt your anger drain out, leaving tired compassion in its place? I didn't say, "I told you so." I wanted to. God, did I? Instead, I said, "What matters is what you do with it now." She sighed. "My father's letter, I keep it by the bed now," she confessed. "It's like he's finally talking to me in a way I can hear." Took me long enough. We started talking more after that, about things that weren't just crisis management. Little stuff. How the kids at her clinic, she'd gone back part-time, complained about waiting rooms. How my unit CO had a habit of mispronouncing my name, but listened when I corrected him. I told her about the younger Marines who came to me with their own family drama because I gave off big sister energy, in their words. "You always did," she said, "even when you were little, trying to make everybody's plate at dinner." "Yeah, well, I'm learning I don't have to carry the whole platter anymore," I said. She laughed. "Your therapist teaching you that?" "Among others," I said. Have you ever finally gone to therapy and realized half your personality was just survival mode wearing different outfits? My counselor, black woman, mid-40s, eyes like she'd seen everything twice, helped me unpack the pieces my father and the Corps had glued together. The strong daughter, the good soldier, the responsible one. She asked questions nobody else had, like, who protects you while you're busy protecting everybody else? And When did you learn that telling the truth meant losing people? We talked about secrets, about B17 and C03, about that manila envelope at the folding table, about the way my father's trust had sometimes felt like love and sometimes like a weight around my neck. He chose you because he saw you, she said one session, but he also put a burden on you that a 17-year-old shouldn't have had to carry alone. So what do I do with that? I asked. He's dead. I can't give it back. You do what you just did, she said. You share it with your mother, with yourself. You stop being the vault and start being the steward. Steward. I like that better than gatekeeper. A steward doesn't hoard, a steward manages. A steward decides where things go so they serve their purpose best. That's what I'd started doing without realizing it. Moving documents to safer places, moving truth from my private file into my mother's hands, moving our story from Dad left us destitute and men are trash to Dad did what he could, now it's on us to use it wisely. Have you ever realized you've been living out a role you didn't choose so long that when you finally adjust it, everything else in your life shifts with it? News right around, of course. Small towns don't need social media to gossip. Church aunties asked my mother coded questions in the fellowship hall. How are you holding up? God revealing a lot, huh? Some came right out with it. I always thought that man talked too much about money. Mom learned to smile, nod, and redirect. We're good, she'd say, looping her arm through mine when I was home. My husband left us taken care of. My daughter made sure of that. The first time she said it in public, my daughter made sure of that, something loosened in my chest I didn't know I'd been clenching for years. Back on base, I found myself walking a little differently, not because I had some dramatic inheritance or secret riches, but because I'd seen what preparation and boundaries could actually do. I'd watched my father's foresight turn into my mother's second chance. I'd watched my own paranoia turn into protection instead of just anxiety. When younger Marines complained about their families bleeding them dry, I'd tell them, get it in writing. Don't just send money home, make a plan. Don't let guilt become a direct deposit. When one of the women in my unit whispered to me about her mom's new boyfriend back home who always asks about my deployment pay, I didn't call her paranoid. I said, let's pull some records. Let's talk about leases and titles. You're not crazy for wanting to know who's circling your family's nest. Because that's the thing they don't say out loud often enough. Black women are expected to be ride or die for everyone, but when we set up a tripwire around the people we love, we get called controlling, bitter, dramatic. I used to shrink when people slapped those labels on me. Now I ask myself, am I being controlling or careful? Bitter or boundaried? Dramatic or just done letting folks play in my face? The answer determines whether I adjust or stand my ground. When I went home next leave, Mom and I went back to Harbor Storage together. Not in crisis this time, just visiting. We opened C03, dusted off a few boxes, watched some of Dad's old camcorder footage on my laptop. One video in particular stuck with me. Him in the kitchen, flour on his shirt, talking to the camera, like he knew we'd be watching years later. If y'all are seeing this, it means I ain't there to yell about the thermostat anymore, he chuckled, then sobered. Gloria, baby, you worthy whether or not you got a man in that bed. Don't forget that. And Lee, eyes crinkled as he looked into the lens, you always been too serious for your own good. Don't let this make you harder, just smarter. Use your head and your heart, not one or the other. He pointed his flour-dusted finger at the camera, and both of y'all, stop trying to carry everything by yourselves. That's what a family is for. We paused the video there, sat in silence for a beat. Your father really sat up here talking like he was the hood Oprah, Mom muttered, wiping her eyes. He wasn't wrong, though, I said. Nope, he wasn't, she agreed. She slid her hand into mine then, squeezing, not like she was my child to be led, but like she was my equal, my teammate. Have you ever felt a generational curse crack a little in the squeeze of your mother's hand? We still argue. We still butt heads. She still has moments where she defaults to, I'm the mom, I know best. I still have moments where my tone gets sharp and I sound more like a gunnery sergeant than a daughter. Healing doesn't turn you into different people. It just gives you better scripts to choose from. But now, when she starts dating again, because I know she will, we have a plan. Background checks aren't unromantic in our house. They're standard. Titles and leases stay in our names. Men are welcome at the table, not on the deed. For me, I carry that key on my chain, but I also know that the real vault is bigger than any unit at Harbor Storage. The real vault is my mind, my boundaries, my willingness to believe myself, even when other people would rather I doubt. My father handed me a metal key and a pile of documents. Life handed me a mother who needed protecting from her own heart sometimes. The military handed me discipline and a taste for documentation. I used to resent it all. Now I see it for what it is. Training. For what? For exactly that moment when a manager's voice shook in my ear and he said, "Ma'am, your stepdad's here with cutters." For the moment I could say, without shaking, I'd been waiting for this. Because I had been. Not because I wanted the chaos, but because I'd prepared for the choice it would force my mother to make. Believe the man with the charm, or believe the daughter with the keys. In the end, she chose the keys. Not just the physical ones dangling from my hand in that warehouse, but the keys that my father had left in those envelopes and safe boxes. Keys to independence, to safety, to the audacious belief that two black women could own something outright without needing a man's permission. So no, I never told my mom what was hidden in Dad's warehouse until the day came when seeing it would set her free instead of just scaring her. And her new husband? He found out too late that my father didn't just leave us things to be taken. He left us the tools to say no more and mean it. After the cutters and the court dates, I stood in front of the same faded blue building with a different weight on my shoulders, stripes on my sleeve, a little more muscle under my cami blouse, and a lot less panic in my chest. Have you ever gone back to the scene of your worst family drama and felt calm? Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because you finally knew where you stood inside it. That day, I wasn't there for emergency damage control. I wasn't there to catch my stepfather in the act or crack open old safes. I was there to hand over a set of keys. "You sure about this?" Mr. Collins asked as his eyebrows disappeared into his thinning hair as I slid the metal ring across the counter to him. "Yeah," I said. "CO3 stays, but B17? I nodded toward the row where that new shiny lock still sat on the scarred door. "We're done with that one. Go ahead and rent it to somebody who just wants to store Christmas decorations." He chuckled. "Shame," he said. "Your daddy's ghost kept me good company in that aisle." "He's got better places to haunt now," I replied, half joking. Have you ever realized that some places only need to hold your story for a while, not forever? We'd emptied B17 over the past months. The couch went to a cousin's new apartment, the old shelves got cut down and repurposed in my mom's shed. The decoy safe, once it came back from police custody, was nothing but a metal box now. I sold it cheap to a mechanic who wanted a lockable toolbox. The real safe in CO3 stayed, of course, but even that had shifted purpose. The folders were scanned and backed up. The cash had partially transformed into a used Honda for my mom so she wasn't relying on anybody else for rides, into a chunk knocked off my student loan balance, into a small scholarship fund at the community college in my father's name for second career black tradespeople. He would have liked that, my mom had said when I told her, helping the ones who didn't go to college first but still want more. He taught me that more doesn't always mean different, I said. Sometimes it just means safer. Now, standing at the counter, I watched Collins tape a available sign onto the paperwork for B17. "Feels like the end of an era," he mused. "It is," I said.
But it's also the start of one where nobody in my family is tempted to think the warehouse is some magic money box we're hiding from them. What needed protecting is protected. What needed exposed got exposed. He nodded. Your mama doing all right? Better, I said. She's got her own bank account again, her own therapist, her own Netflix profile so she doesn't have to share passwords with anybody's son. He laughed at that. And you? Still on base, I said, still yelling at boots to tie their laces, still making sure my Marines know the difference between a battle plan and a panic response. Have you ever noticed that skills you learned in one war, family, financial, bleed over into how you fight the others? Later that afternoon, Mom met me at a diner down the road. No Carl, no man, actually, just her, in a sundress and sneakers, looking more like herself than she had in years. You really closed it? She asked as I slid into the booth. Closed one, I said, kept the other. We're not hoarders, we're curators. She tilted her head. Curators, huh? Yeah, I said. We decide what gets to stay in our lives and what gets moved out. She stirred her iced tea thoughtfully. Pastor's wife asked me last week if I was open to love again, she said, air quoting with a little smirk. I told her I'm open to joy. Love can apply if it fills out the right forms. I snorted. You said that? Sure did, she said. You should have seen her face. But you know, for the first time, I meant it. I'm not saying I'll never date again. I'm saying I won't trade my peace for someone's presence. Have you ever heard your mother say words you wish she'd known 20 years ago and felt both grief and pride at the same time? We talked about little things after that. Recipes, my next deployment, the neighbor's new pit bull that thought it was a lapdog. At one point, she reached across the table and flicked the chain at my neck. You still wearing that key? I asked, fingers brushing the cool metal. Yeah, I said. It's a good reminder. Of what? Of Dad. Of what forethought looks like. Of what my job is in this family and what it isn't. She raised an eyebrow. And what isn't it? Fixing every choice you make, I said. I'll warn you if I see smoke. I'll grab a bucket if you ask, but I'm not responsible for keeping matches out of your house. She nodded slowly. Fair, she said. And my job? To believe me when I say I smell smoke, even if you can't see the flames yet. We clinked glasses on that. Iced tea and water instead of champagne, but it felt like a toast all the same. Have you ever renegotiated a lifetime contract with someone you love without signing a single piece of paper? Back on base a month later, I got cornered in the gym by one of the younger enlisted guys, Thompson, who'd heard whispers about Sergeant Brooks and her warehouse situation. Sarge, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, can I ask you something? My mom's dating this guy who keeps asking about what I send home, says he's helping her budget. I told her it made me uncomfortable, and she said I'm being ungrateful. What would you do? Old me might have said, send less money, or mind your business. New me, the steward, not the vault, said, you got 10 minutes after this workout? He nodded. I sat him down in the corner of the rec room with my laptop, showed him how to search public records, how to set up direct deposit into an account only his mother could access, not some joint one with a new man. Isn't that meddling? He asked, hesitant. It's called protecting your investment, I said, and your mother. You can't control who she loves. You can control whether your support becomes bait for somebody else's hook. Have you ever realized that the best way to honor the people who protected you is to pass that protection on, even if it looks different for the next person? Sometimes late at night, when the barracks are finally quiet and the only sound is someone's soft snore and the air conditioner, I pull out the little thumb drive I made from Dad's camcorder footage. I watch him on that tiny screen, laughing, lecturing, messing up words and correcting himself, dancing terribly in the kitchen while my mom boos and cheers. You did good, Lee, he imagined saying, old flour-dusted finger wagging at me. Took you too long to open that safe for your mama, but you got there. Next time, maybe trust yourself a little sooner. He's right. About trusting myself, about not carrying things alone, about love being bigger than locks and folders. That's what I did next, after the cutters and the cops and the court dates. I didn't just keep guarding the warehouse like a dragon on a pile of gold. I used what was in it.
I let it change how my mother saw herself, how I saw myself, how we both saw the men who wanted to help us manage what we'd already earned. I closed one unit so another could stay sacred, not as a secret, but as a resource. And I let that story, our story, be something I could tell without shame, because it's not about being a paranoid Black daughter who can't let go. It's about being a Black woman who finally understood that the legacy her father left wasn't about what was hidden in a building at the edge of town. It was about the permission to say no, the courage to back that no up with receipts, and the wisdom to open the door only when the people on the other side were ready to see what was really inside.